As we know, what happened on January 16th, in a short period of time, 100,000 Iraqi civilians had been killed. In a televised documentary celebrating the 10th anniversary of this invasion, that's 2001 in January, then Vice President Dick Cheney, when this happened, he was Secretary of Defense. When he takes this quote from this documentary, which I'm going to give, he's then now the Vice President, 2001 January. This is before 9/11. Quote, this is the true nature of why they were there. If you would have let Saddam Hussein get away with this takeover of Kuwait, then he would have been able to establish himself as the principal military power in the Gulf. Of course, what was at stake here was who was going to dominate the Gulf and thereby influence world oil reserves. Who is going to control those reserves in future years? Unquote. This is a picture of what it was really about. I don't think you can probably see the lines, but if you can see, can you see the dark blue arrows? Okay, those are existing oil pipelines going out of the big, I said in 1904, the grand prize. This is where it is, all that red and where all those arrows are. And where all those Air Force bases, those airplanes are, those are U.S. Air bases attacking the areas to secure this oil. And the lighter blue arrows are the proposed pipelines. And you see the one going through Afghanistan over there on the right? Well, see, our government is helping to try to secure those pipeline areas. So that kind of puts meat to what Cheney was talking about. Okay, next slide, please. I said I'd mention just a couple of the modern public relations people, and this is John Rendon from the Rendon Group. And since '91, he's made tens of millions of dollars, actually. And in 1996, he did a short speech, and I just quote one line from that. I am an information warrior and a perception manager. We've worked in 91 countries, going all the way back to Panama. We've been in every war, unquote. ABC News did a little piece on him, the man behind the curtain, and he called it the Wizard of Oz thing. Can anyone here see Edward Bernays' puppeteer public relations energy kind of moving along? Okay, next one. Diane Forsetta. She's a senior researcher with the Center for Media and Democracy. I had mentioned that these video news releases, they put these out as fake news, and they do thousands of these. She says, fake news has been an open, dirty secret between broadcasters and public relations firms for decades. Now you have to understand that the cost to collect news costs money, but media moguls, they're not really into spending money on news. They're into making money. So these VNRs, the money just pours in. And in fact, Forsetta says they get thousands of these a year. Money coming at you to air these, and they're fake news. She says they get about 10 to 15 a day. And she says also that there's almost zero chance, if you wanted to call the radio TV station and find out who is behind that clip, because I see them all the time now because I've been steeped in this for some time, and I can see them. They are so easy to spot. And anyway, if you call them, they won't tell you who it is, because that's like saying, hey, someone's giving me graft, and I'm going to expose them? No, thank you, buddy. But she goes on to say that this is total violation of all local community regulations, as well as the federal communication regulations. So there has to be a lot of work to change that if there's going to be a change to the better. The line across the middle there is kind of to represent the continuum of the medium, kind of from the left of the media to the right. And if you look at the top on the left, I have got there the people. And below there it says no major daily newspapers or TV stations are basically owned by the people. This comes from William Blum, who wrote an incredible book called Killing Hope. Down at the bottom, William Blum, September 25th. That's the source for that, his anti-empire report. very astute observer of U.S. foreign policy. And then also down there is Noam Chomsky, who a lot of you probably know has done a lot of exposés on U.S. government and foreign policy. And he basically shows us how the U.S. is a one-party system. And it's really skewed way to the far right. And there's kind of a little mock game of left versus right that goes on, but it's between themselves, really. So if we go to the far right, up on the little triangle at the top, you'll see the CFR, that stands for Council of Foreign Relations. And the left and right is the Council of Foreign Relations. This is what you see on TV all the time. They're debating as if this is the entire debate going on across the globe, and there's no such debate going on across the globe like they have got it skewed. An example of what they would be talking about would be Russia's an evil empire. That would not be questioned. It would be questioned. The debate would be about how we're going to contain them. Now, the left of the Council of Foreign Relations would argue, oh, well, we're going to block them, we're going to contain them and hold them. Whereas the ones on the right would say, oh, no, we can't trust them for anything. You know, this is preemptive time. You get them because if they had our position, they'd do it to us anyway. So that's what the debate is about, but it's all way over on the far right. So you'll see publications in the major newspapers, periodicals, and I've just named a few here just to show: Times, Newsweek, Vanity Fair, Maclean's. And sometimes you'll see in the middle, there's some that are kind of in the middle of the spectrum where they'll have kind of some articles going on both sides. So just to give you an idea of how that works, let's go to the next slide. This is the title up there, The New Media Monopoly. That's actually the title of a book by Ben Bodikian. In 1983, he wrote a first version of this book, and at that time, 50 corporations dominated the nation's mass media. By 2005, it was down to 5. So here they are in terms of money and power: Time Warner, Walt Disney, Murdoch News, Viacom, Bertelsmann. Will you click the next one? And now what I've done here is I've just added below that. It just so happens that in Canada we have 5 major media moguls as well: CanWest, Bell Canada, Quebecor, Torstar Corporation, and Rogers Communications. And so these 5 then basically constitute the top red sector of the monopoly. Fellow neoconservative traveler and media mogul Rupert Murdoch, number 3 up there, he sneered at a news person. Someone asked him a question about the news, and he said, where he got his news, he says, I don't get news. Quote, I tell you what the news is, unquote. And Richard Salant, a former president of CBS News, said, I quote, our job is to give people not what they want, but what we decide they ought to have, unquote. How do all the media moguls fit into the bigger picture of the big power structure then? Next slide, please. Now, if we recall that the Frank Church Senate Committee hearings, they couldn't get the names of any of these 1,000 books. And so where does that refusal come from? It has to come from a higher government. They're part of the government. So I just have displayed it here as the aristocracy above, because earlier we referred to them as the nobility. Or Bernays' hidden elite government. The marriage of media, government, and corporations, it constitutes what Dwight D. Eisenhower used to call the military-industrial complex. And that was actually the same thing in World War II under fascism, which Mussolini in Italy called actually corporatism. Now these terms are now interchangeable with U.S. global hegemony or globalism, we often hear, or the New World Order, as Bush told us basically we have. In the big picture then, we might say then that instead we might call it a global aristocracy, which I have there at the bottom, because it kind of encompasses all of them. And I say global aristocracy because it's the aristocratic mindset that continues from the past into the present, and because the royal families that this ultimately encompasses are really all over the world. There are several families involved.